With me today is Rich Siegel from Barebones Software, makers of BB Edit, Yojimbo, WeatherCal, and Text Wrangler, among many other wonderful software packages. Rich, how would you define your role at Barebones?
Well, I'm one of the founders, and technically, I'm what's called in the U.S. the chief executive officer. And in a practical daily sense, I oversee engineering, and that means I actually do a lot of engineering as well. But in the corporate sense of things, I'm at the top of the org chart. Uh, Technically, everybody answers to me, and so forth.
Well, I always, when I always think of you as sort of like, for me, you're a big guy out there who's like really been around on the map for a long time, done some really cool stuff, and certainly it's an honor to be able to interview you, to be honest.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
And who's this guy you got next to you there?
Oh, this is Bruno. He's an African gray parrot. He's a little over 3 years old. He's one of two that I have actually, but he's by far the most willing to stick his beak in and get involved.
All right, so maybe he can help out with some of the questions, huh?
Yeah. When I say everybody answers to me, really, when I answer to him.
Oh, I see. For you, what do you think is a typical workday of somebody who works remotely?
Well, let me preface all of this by saying that I, in fact, work remote. We do have a central office, the main office, but I work remotely mostly because of geographical considerations. I'm about an hour and a half's drive from the office, and doing that commute every day is really impractical. So I, in fact, work in a home office. But for many years, I did work at the main office. So I've seen both sides of that coin. And a typical workday at a home office is really like a typical workday at another office. You get up, you have your morning routine, and you go through it, and then you go to work. Mm-hmm. And it's real important to have a daily working routine, because otherwise it's very difficult to actually be consistently productive.
Mm-hmm. So how else do you find people, like when you have a specific need? I mean, I was sort of like, I had something to contribute, and you invited me to participate. But what about when you have, like, I need somebody who knows, I don't know, XSLT, one of my favorite topics.
Well, what we do is when we need somebody for a specific job, we have, each of us knows people. We've been around for a while, and we have friends, and we have colleagues, both former and current, and we can say, do you know somebody who's an XSLT expert?
Mm-hmm. I see.
Do you know somebody who understands a particular problem domain? Pick one. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't work, sometimes we'll look at our support email. We'll say, this person has previously been asking about a particular problem domain. They know somebody.
That's a good point.
We've hired people based on their past visibility on our discussion lists. Mm. It was clear that not only were they good at what they did, but they had knowledge that lined up with our needs in a particular area.
Sorry to interrupt, but you just touched on something that I think is particularly difficult for me to communicate to many of my students. And that is, you said you found somebody who's particularly good at what they do. Mm-hmm. A lot of your communication, probably, I'd say this is the first time we've ever spoken, actually. So all of our communication has been in writing through email and an occasional chat, but primarily through email. How would you classify the importance of communicating clearly through email, and what impact or what degree formatting has on that communication? You know what I'm saying?
I would say there is no more valuable skill than being able to express yourself clearly and effectively in writing. And it really doesn't matter whether it's on paper or on a sticky note or in email. It's probably, I think, one of the most important skills an individual can have.
So where do I send the check for that answer?
You don't have to. I'll happily tell that to anybody who asks.
Well, that's it. I completely agree, of course. But like, this is kind of a silly thing that I'm going to say. But what about when people send you HTML formatted email? How do you make things really big or pretty colors and stuff like that? What does that tell you about who's sending it?
What it tells me is, a lot of that stuff I see. We see a certain amount of that stuff in support, where folks will actually send in support mails, and they've got some huge image on the end of it because their corporate system did it. It's really distressing. I don't receive a lot of personal communication in that form just because I don't ever see it. Emails, and they've been styled for quoting purposes. The client did that. But there are relatively few people that I communicate with routinely who actually go to the trouble, if you will, of using really goofy style or layout stuff in their emails.
Okay.
Hold on. Yeah, this like.
Well, he listens to you.
Yeah, when he feels like it.
Tell me, I'd like to know some of the best and worst experiences of yours working remotely, and kind of how being remote changed the dynamic versus had you been in the same office. How you handled it, what worked, what didn't work.
Well, the first time I worked remotely was actually when we were starting the company. There were 3 of us, and we didn't have office space. So we had no choice. We basically set up shop. Each of us lived in apartments or rented houses, and each of us set up an office at home, and we stayed in touch, and we would periodically get together and meet just to stay in sync and keep up to date, because there are really a lot of times when there's no substitute for meeting in person. And so we did that for a few years, and then we got the office space, and then we've come full circle, so that there's somebody in the main office, but a lot of us are working remotely. And when you have somebody working remotely, there has to be trust on one side and responsibility on the other. And it's really no different than having an in-person employee, because what you're saying when you hire somebody is, I'm going to make sure that you know what your job is, and I'm going to make sure that you have everything that you need to do your job, and then I'm going to trust you to do it. And if you don't perform to expectations or requirements, well, that problem is really the same, irrespective of whether they're in your office or working at home.
Have you had any? I mean, have you had any real issues with people working remotely that you could share, or that you would, and how they were more importantly, how were they resolved?
Well, a long time ago, there were a couple of projects where we had an individual who we contracted out to work to do the work, and it just didn't happen. He kept saying, "Oh, I'll have it ready in a week," and a week would go by, and he wouldn't have anything. And finally, we said, "Okay, well, you're not delivering anything, and we're not going to wait any longer. We need to get this done."
Yeah,
sorry, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
I've been there on both sides.
and that's really sort of the worst case, where you put that trust into somebody and they don't deliver. And he felt badly, and we felt badly, because whenever something doesn't work out, it's because there's missteps on both sides, either in or expectation or what have you. On the other hand, we generally internally we have core engineers working remotely. As I said, we work remotely, and one of my colleagues works remotely, and we're working quite effectively. What we notice is we do lose a little bit of productivity, because there's a big difference between sitting in the office next door and being 100 miles away.
What is that difference, do you think?
Well, the productivity difference, we're probably about 10 or 15% less efficient
Mm-hmm.
than if we were in this than we were when we were in the same building.
Huh.
But
Are you 10 or 15% happier?
well, we kind of, we have a little bit more scheduling flexibility, and we have a little bit more time in the day. We're not spending time commuting, and we're not spending money on gasoline
Yeah.
and whatnot. And it's not exactly a fair trade. However, it's there's definitely a trade-off. There's definitely a balance. I just want to come down pretty hard on one of the points that, as I said, there's no more valuable skill than being able to express yourself well in writing, and the medium really doesn't matter. That's one of the things we look for when we're looking at people is do you express yourself clearly in writing?
Mm-hmm.
If you do, that's an important first step. And that the basic requirements of working remotely really aren't any different from somebody you work in an office with. You want somebody, whenever you hire somebody, you want to hire somebody that you'd be willing to share a building with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Rich. Very nice.
Well, thank you, Ted.
Nice meeting you.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks again for likewise, and thanks again for asking.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.